and freedom in the world because they believe that is the will of God. Okay, so they rebel against the feudal lords that kill them, and then the entire monarchy unite, the aristocracy unite because they see these peasants as a threat. Okay? Now, there are lots of these peasants. We estimate maybe about 200,000 join in this rebellion. But they are not educated. They are not organized. They have no weapons. And they have no centralized authority. And therefore, they're all massacred by the aristocratic armies. Okay? All right, so this is the Peasants' War. And this is important because eventually we will discuss communism. And communism will be developed in response to the Peasants' War, okay? So this is the deadliest massacre of peasants before the French Revolution. 1534 is the Act of Supremacy. That is when the King of England, Henry VIII, declares his independence from the Pope, okay? But because there's such a strong Catholic contingent in England, Henry VIII maintains Catholic practices. But rather than have Pope be at the head of the church, he himself is now head of the church. Okay, it's called the Church of England now, and the religion is called Anglican, the Anglican religion. Okay, the Anglican religion. All right. So the thing that we should observe about the Protestant Reformation is that, first of all, it's extremely diverse. Okay, there are lots of different denominations. The Lutherans are those who believe in Martin Luther, okay? The Calvinists are those who believe in double predestination. The Anglicans are English who still follow Catholic rituals, but rather than follow a pope, they follow the King of England, okay? The Hussites are those who adhere to Jane Hus in Bohemia. The Unitarians are interesting. The Unitarians are those who deny the divinity of Jesus. They deny the Holy Trinity. God is God, and Jesus is just the Messiah. He's just a prophet of God. Okay? So they affirm the moral teachings of Jesus, but they deny his divinity. You also have the Anabaptists. Okay? The Anabaptists are interesting as well because they believe that to truly believe in God, you must choose to do so. Therefore, you must not baptize infants. Because when you do so, you force children to believe in God, even though they themselves lack the capacity, lack the reason to believe in God. Okay? So only adults can join the faith. And they must do so voluntarily. All right? So as you can see, there's tremendous divergence, there's tremendous diversity within the Protestant faith, and it still continues today, okay? Every day you have new denominations opening up because people are interpreting the Bible differently. Another thing that you will notice is that most of the Protestants are actually located in Northern Europe, right? So the countries of England, Germany, the Nordic countries, Switzerland, they will go Protestant. And in the South, France, Spain, Italy, they will remain Catholic. The only exception is this, the south of France, okay? The south of France. The south of France will turn Protestant. And it's interesting for us because if you look at a map, okay, the Protestant French are heavily centered in the south of France. And if you remember from last week, that's where the Cathars are also located, okay? So some historians believe that Protestantism and Catharism, they sort of mingle together. They combine and became conflated together, okay? Other historians believe that it's because that culturally, the south of France, because it's like surrounded by mountains, it's always been culturally independent of the rest of France. They speak a local language called Provençal, which is different from French. Okay? These Protestants in France, they're mainly the middle class. They're extremely well educated. They become very, very prosperous, and they're joined by the nobility. And as such, the King of France, and France is right now the most powerful country in Europe. the King of France sees him as a threat. And so what he'll do is he'll kill some of the nobles, which launches the St. Bartholomew Day's Massacre in 1572. Okay, that's a day when tens of thousands of French Protestants called Huguenots were killed. And this will start a process by which these Huguenots, extremely well-educated, extremely hardworking, extremely wealthy, they will move to Protestant countries like England and the Netherlands and Germany. And they will help these countries jumpstart the Industrial Revolution. Okay? They will bring their expertise and they will help these countries jumpstart the Industrial Revolution. So this is a tremendous loss for France, tremendous gain for the other Protestant nations. Okay, so eventually, Europe is divided into two major factions, the Catholic faction and the Protestant faction. And these two factions will eventually engage in something called the 30 Years' War, okay, between the Habsburgs, okay, the Holy Roman Empire, which is supported by the Pope, versus basically the independent states of Germany, okay? And this is a war that will last exactly 30 years. And again, it will kill at most 8 million people. It is the deadliest war in European history up until World War I. What's interesting about this war is that France, which is Catholic, chooses to join the Protestants in this war because they see the Holy Roman Empire as an imperial threat. They're afraid that if they allow the Habsburgs to take over Germany, then eventually they will swallow up France, okay? So it was a religious war, but it was also a geopolitical and imperial war. All right, and again, this war ends with the Treaty of Westphalia, which guarantees religious freedom in Europe. Okay, so the religious wars will end, and Protestant religion will now be free to develop independently. Okay, so this is called the Peace of Westphalia. Okay, so now let's summarize and let's discuss the evidence for my argument that the Protestant Reformation gave birth to capitalism. Okay, so these are the three major differences between the Catholic religion and the Protestant religion. The question then is, why is it that the North will become mainly Protestant and the South of Europe will stay mainly Catholic? Okay, so one thing that we discussed in this class is the persistence of culture. So again, no one knows why this is the case, okay? And you'll hear different arguments. It could have been weather, it could have been personality, it could have been a lot of different factors, okay? But one possibility I want to present to you today is the cultural factor, which is that the south of France and the north of France are culturally different, all right? So let's look at south of France. South of Europe. The southern Europe, countries of Spain, France, and Italy were heavily influenced by Roman culture. That's where the Roman Empire was based, right? The Roman Empire eventually became an imperial bureaucracy. There are three core values to the Romans, right? Liberty. Now, liberty, this is really important, it means obedience to the law. Because only by obeying the law can people be free to do what they want, okay? Secondly, is the idea of republica. Republica means public virtue, to serve the public good, which basically means obeying what the Senate tells you to do, okay? Obeying authority. And the last is the idea of piety, which is to respect the customs and history and traditions of Rome. Okay, so these are the three major values of the Romans. And we can believe that they became embedded in the south of Europe. Now, let's look at Viking culture, okay? And when I say Vikings, I don't really mean Vikings per se. What I really mean are those Proto-Indo-Europeans that never really assimilated into Roman culture. All right? So what are their values? Well, they believe in courage, they believe in loyalty, and they believe in resourcefulness, okay? And we discussed this when we discussed the Vikings. Now, what we're going to do is this. We're going to map Catholic belief with Romans, and we're going to map Viking belief with the Protestants and see what happens. Okay, so the Catholics, they believe in orthodoxy, right? Well, the Romans also believe in orthodoxy. They call it liberty, right? Obedience to laws. Don't question laws, just obey them. Catholics believe in hierarchy. Well, Romans believe in hierarchy as well. They believe in obeying the Senate. The Senate is the ultimate authority, right? Catholics believe in justification by works. The Romans believe in piety, right? Respecting tradition. You don't have to believe in these traditions, but you must respect them. All right? So this is pretty close. I mean, it's not perfect. All right? But this suggests that Roman culture had a tremendous influence on the development of the Catholic Church. Now let's look at the Protestants, okay? They believed in direct access to God through the Bible. Well, the Vikings believed in courage. What is courage? Courage is self-exploration, to go out into the unknown and figure out things for yourself, okay? And that's what the Bible is. That's what faith is, to read the Bible by yourself and to interpret the Bible in your own way. And you have to do so using emotional and spiritual courage, all right? Egalitarianism. So the Vikings had a concept of loyalty. And loyalty is basically the idea of mutual love. I'm loyal to you and you're loyal back to me because we love each other. All right? And the last concept is justification by faith. An individual struggle to come to terms with what God means to you individually. Okay? And the Vikings believed in resourcefulness, right? Which is also the idea of individual struggle. You can figure out by yourself if you work hard enough, if you will yourself, you have the courage to do so. Okay? So, again, I leave this as a possibility. Okay? Don't treat this as a historical fact. I just suggest this as a way to think about why the Protestants became Protestants, the Catholics became Catholics. Okay? And a lot of it has to do with the cultural residue from the past. Okay? All right? So this is just a thought experiment. All right. So let's now talk about why is it that the Protestant Reformation won out. Again, they were up against the Holy Roman Empire. They were up against Catholic Church. There were more people in Catholic Europe. Catholic Europe was wealthier and stronger, but they still won, okay? And the reason why they won is due to the invention of three things. The first thing is the printing press, which allowed for mass literacy and education. Now, everyone could read the Bible. Before, you couldn't do so. You couldn't afford a Bible. But now everyone can read the Bible. But not only that, but everyone can now become self-educated. You can read all the classics by yourself. Okay? And the Protestant religion compelled you to be literate and to be educated. And as such, the Protestants as a whole were more well-educated than the Catholics. Okay? That's the first reason, the printing press. Second reason is the musket. This is really important. Before, the main weapon, the ultimate weapon, was a knight, the armored knight. And the armored knight was a professional soldier, right? And that's where the knights were the nobility, because they had to spend all their time training for war, going to war, fighting wars. And it's very expensive to be a knight. But now, eventually, you have the gun, the musket, okay? And it takes about 60 days for anyone to learn how to use the musket. And the musket is, the thing about the musket that's really important is it's able to pierce the armor of the knight, which makes the knight useless in war now, okay? It's a musket that is important. So in other words, anyone who has courage and devotion, meaning the Protestants, they're able to fight a war. And the musket will be vital, it'll be crucial for both the American Revolution and the French Revolution, okay? And we'll discuss the musket when we get to the American Revolution and the French Revolution. The last thing is the idea of banknotes, okay? Before, people used gold or coins that were minted with gold in order to trade goods. Now you can use banknotes, which is just money, okay? And you can now monetize your hard work and frugality. You can now channel your hard work and frugality into banknotes. What's really important now is there's only a finite number of gold and coins, right? But there's an infinite source of banknotes. So you can work infinitely hard, okay? So what this means is, before the Protestant Reformation, it was really hard to get people to work hard. Because let's just say that you are an employer and you want to be like, okay, I'm going to pay people more, right? But when you pay people more, they actually work less because they can't spend that money. They're like, well, you know, if I have to work 8 hours a day to make $100, but now I just work 2 hours a day to make $100, I'll just work 2 hours. So we actually work less. And in this system, slavery makes sense because the way to get people to work hard is to force them into eternal debt, which is what slavery is. But in this new Protestant system, then slavery is an evil, because you're denying people the capacity to be with God, right? You are with God if you work hard. But if you're a slave, how do you measure the hard work? You're not able to work hard. And that's why, after the Protestant Reformation, one of the main things that they did was eventually outlaw slavery. Okay? So there are lots of good things about the Protestant Reformation. You have the Industrial Revolution, you have the end of slavery, you have the rise of capitalism, you have the rise of the middle class. You have lots of really good things. But there's also no denying that there are some bad effects as well, okay? All right. So this is a printing press invented by Gutenberg. This is what a printing press looks like. You have the musket, okay? So before, people had bows, right? And the bows were used by trained archers, and they weren't that powerful. But now with the musket, you're able to pierce knight armor, okay? Because there's more energy, 3,100 joules within the bullet. And then you have banknotes as well. And banknotes really is the exception of wealth, okay? Which means that in theory now, you could have infinite wealth. Why we're so wealthy today? Because we abstracted wealth. Okay. Before, wealth was limited because gold was limited. But now with banknotes, with money, in theory, wealth can be infinite. Okay. Okay. So this is John Wesley, who is the founder of the Methodist Church. Okay, and he summarizes the idea of Protestantism really well. We ought not to prevent people from being diligent and frugal. We must exhort all Christians to gain all they can and to save all they can. That is, in effect, to grow rich. Right? So Protestants believe that it is God's calling. It is your mission to get rich. And that's how you know that you're favored by God. All right? And the way to get rich is by working hard and not spending any money. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is present the evidence for my argument that the Protestant religion gave birth to capitalism. Okay? And to do so, I'm going to refer to three major thinkers: Max Weber, Emil Durkheim, and Georg Simmel. They're all sociologists. They're considered three major founders of the social sciences. Okay? And they're all contemporaries. They were all writing about the year 1900. Why this is important is the year 1900 is really when the Protestant religion is most triumphant. Right? This is when capitalism is most dominant. Even though most people are not Protestants, the work ethic, the belief system has conquered the world. Germany, Britain, United States are the three most powerful countries in the world at this time. They're the three largest empires. And they're all Protestant nations. And as such, they can impose Protestant beliefs on everyone else. Okay? And in the year 1900, it's also before World War I. So at this time, everyone thinks that this is the greatest thing in the world. Protestantism, Industrial Revolution, capitalism are all divinely sent by God to bless humanity. Okay? And what Max Weber, Georg Simmel, and Emil Durkheim are trying to do is figure out what's really going on, okay? And to see if there are any consequences to this system. And what they will show us is, in fact, there are a lot of problems in this system, okay? So let's first look at Max Weber, who in 1904 to 1905, from 1905, he wrote something called The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. He's trying to explain why is it that Protestants are a lot wealthier than Catholics in general. Okay? And this is what he has to say. So far as predestination was not reinterpreted, toned down, or fundamentally abandoned. Okay? So remember, double predestination. Right? The belief that God has already selected those who will go to heaven, and you must prove to yourself that you're one of them. Two principal, mutually connected types of pastoral advice appear. Okay? So there are two consequences to the idea of predestination. On the one hand, it is held to be an absolute duty to consider oneself chosen, okay? So only a minority are going to heaven. The odds are you're not going to heaven, but you must believe you're going to heaven. Otherwise, you lack faith in God. Otherwise, you don't truly believe in God. And then therefore, you'll be truly condemned by God. And to combat all doubts as temptations of the devil, since lack of self-confidence is the result of insufficient faith, hence of imperfect grace. Okay? To prove that God is perfect, to prove that God loves you, you must truly believe that you are chosen by God. If you doubt yourself, then you'll be condemned to hell. Okay? Then you become a servant of the devil. The exhortation of the apostle to make fast one's own call is here interpreted as a duty to attain certainty of one's own election and certification in the daily struggle of life. Okay? So you need to prove that you are one of the elect by focusing on this world. Okay? Focus your energies on conquering this world. On the other hand, in order to attain that self-confidence, intense worldly activity is recommended as the most suitable means. It and it alone disperses religious doubt and gives the certainty of grace. Okay? So this idea of you have anxiety, how do you deal with anxiety? Work. Okay? OCD, obsessive compulsive behavior. What kind of work do you do? Make money. Because the money is proof of God's grace. All right? Okay, so he continues. There's worldly Protestant asceticism. Okay? Asceticism just means like you're actually not spending any money, okay? Not only are you compelled to make a lot of money, but you're also compelled not to spend any of it. Not to enjoy it, because that leads to corruption. That leads to decadence. Acted powerfully against the spontaneous enjoyment of possessions. It restricted consumption, especially of luxuries. Okay? So no one's spending any of this money. Where's this money going? It's going to the bank. And who's using this money in the bank? The government is. And what are they doing? They're using it to fight wars. Right? And that's how England, the Netherlands became empires. Because it had access to all this surplus wealth that the Protestants weren't spending. On the other hand, it had the psychological effect of freeing the acquisition of goods from the inhibitions of traditionalist ethics. Okay, so the idea here is this. Before, if you were wealthy, you were expected by everyone around you to support the community, usually by organizing feasts on religious festivals, okay? You were expected to share your wealth. If you had too much money, it showed that you were against the community, okay? It showed that you were selfish. But now, people believe that if you're wealthy, it means God favors you. The more wealth you have, the more people respect you, okay? It's a complete inverse from the historical case. Historically, we believe that those who have too much money are evil. Now we believe that those who have too much money are inherently good. Okay, it's a complete reverse. It broke the bonds of the impulse of acquisition in that it not only legalized it, but looked upon it as directly willed by God, okay? So before it's embarrassing to have too much money, now it is prestigious to have too much money. The campaign against the temptations of the flesh and the dependence on external things was not a struggle against the rational acquisition, but against the irrational use of wealth. Okay? So what's evil is not to make a lot of money. What's evil is to use that money to enjoy yourself. All right? Okay, so now he discusses the problems with this ideology, okay? The Puritan want to work in a calling, okay? So the Puritans want to be close to God. We are forced to do so. We're not Puritans. Most of the world is not Puritans. But we're stuck. We are imprisoned in their world. They create this world and we're stuck in it. For when asceticism was carried out of monastic cells into everyday life, okay, so the idea was in the Catholic Church, If you wanted to be an ascetic, if you wanted to deny the world, you went into a monastery. The Puritans made the entire world into a monastery, okay? And began to dominate worldly morality. It did its part in building the tremendous cosmos of the modern economic order. He's talking about capitalism, okay? So capitalism was created by the Puritans in order to rationalize the world. This order is now bound to the technical and economic conditions of machine production, which today determine the lives of all the individuals who are born into this mechanism, not only those directly concerned with economic acquisition with irresistible force. Okay? So they create this system, which is industrial production. And this industrial production has made us all into slaves. And the soul of this industrial production system is capitalism. Wealth for the sake of wealth. Okay? And there's no denying the system. You can never free yourself from the system. You're stuck inside the system. But not only that, but this entire of industrial production, it has permeated into all aspects of life. It's permeated into the family. It's permeated into the school. Okay? Why do you have grades? Why do we have tests? Because of this industrial economy. Right? Grades, tests are another form of money. Perhaps it will so determine them until the last ton of fossilized coal is burnt. Okay? What he's saying here is that this system will keep on going until we destroy the planet. Okay? And until we run out of resources. Because that's what capitalism is. It's the exploitation of the environment. In Baxter's view, the care for external goods should only lie on the shoulders of the saint like a light cloak, which can be thrown aside at any moment. Okay? So the idea of Protestantism is, listen, external wealth is just a measure of your faith in God. That's not what's important. What's important is your faith, right? But the faith decreed that the cloak should become an iron cage. Okay? Money was supposed to be a tool. Money was supposed to be a mechanism for us to connect with God. But now money, capitalism, industrial production, it's become our prison. There's no denying it. No one can now escape this. Okay? Okay? Does it make sense?